Number 6.
So my mum left the picture when I was 3. She literally picked up one day and just walked out. So for a long time, it was just my dad and I. I'm a male, and at the time my dad met Tammy, I was 13. I was chubby, and at the time, small for my age. I still had my baby fat. I was, and still am, a nerd. So was my dad, and we shared a love of Star Wars, comic books, and science fiction. My dad decided that he needed to meet someone. He was lonely, and I thought it would be nice to have a mother figure. This was before online dating, and there was still personals in the paper. My dad filled out an ad, and it wasn't long before he met Tammy. I remember him telling me about her, and how happy he looked. They dated for a month before my dad figured it was getting serious, and he wanted to introduce me to her. So my dad decided to take us out for dinner, then a movie. I remember my grandma helping me to get dressed, and I was super nervous to meet her. She seemed nice at first, but even at that age, I could sense that something was off. We went to Sizzler's for dinner, and my dad told me to order whatever I liked. He then excused himself to the bathroom. I smiled at Tammy, went to say something, and she cuts me off, telling me that my dad's been letting me eat whatever I wanted, and that I'm a fat little piggy. She demonstrated this by actually fucking making pig noises. I was crushed. I mean, honestly, I wasn't very heavy. Maybe a little chubby, but not obese like some children are today. And my dad actually didn't let me eat whatever I wanted. But anyways, back to the story. She ignored me until my dad came back, and then played nice. I, for my dad's sake, faked being nice to her. I wanted to tell my dad what she said, but I didn't want to disappoint him or upset him. My dad was, and is, my best friend. Anyway, so I hoped and prayed my dad would realize what a bitch she was and come to his senses. But sadly, he didn't. They dated steadily, and when I was 15, Tammy moved in. Now, that summer, I finally lost my baby fat and grew like a good foot or two. My dad's 6'3", so it wasn't surprising that I shot up to almost 6 feet by age 15. Puberty kicked in too, and my voice was doing that weird cracking thing. I made it a point to avoid Tammy. I went to school, came home, and stayed in my room and did my homework and waited for my dad to get home. However, she started in on me most days as soon as I walked in. She'd always find something. I was a loser, I was stupid, etc. Just cruel, mean things. The few times I told my dad, he just insisted that we all needed to adjust. So I just decided that I could put up with it for 3 more years for my dad's sake, then I was out of there. The next 3 years really sucked. Her insults got meaner. She would also do things like put glass, pieces of paper and sand in my food, and just my plate. I started refusing to eat her food. I was terrified that she would poison me or something. And it was around this time that my dad and her got married. Graduation came, and I was so relieved because I was set to enlist in the army. I planned on being in basic by July, but of course, she had to try and ruin that. My recruiter got a call from someone saying that I smoked pot and did drugs. Thankfully, I passed my drug test, but I know that it was her. One night before I left for boot camp, my dad had a huge party for me. She had tried to cancel it earlier, claiming she was sick, but by that point, my dad had already invited most of my family and friends. She pouted the entire time. I started to see that my dad was kind of starting to see past her facade. Let's skip a few more years, and I get leave. I've been deployed twice now, and I hadn't seen my dad in 22 months, so I was dying to see him. He told me in previous conversations that their marriage was pretty much over. She not only was controlling and verbally abusive, but a few weeks prior, she had knocked my dad out with a cast iron skillet. He had given her an ultimatum of a month to get out, or he was throwing her crap out. The night I got in was late. My dad picked me up and we came home. She was gone supposedly. She started moving her crap into her sister's and was pretty much staying most nights there. So Dad and I eat and we get to bed. Around 1, I feel my bed move. I'm exhausted and figure it's my dad's dog Caesar, a German Shepherd. But that's when I feel hands go around my neck and my soldier instincts kick in. I flip the intruder over and subdue them. My dad runs in and flips the light on. He's got his gun out. And, surprise, surprise, it's my stepmonster. Dad calls the police, files a restraining order, and serves her with divorce papers. A lot more shit happens, such as her destroying my dad's new Mercedes, but I won't bore you with the details. What matters is that they're divorced, and I never have to see that bitch again.
Number 5.
On a rainy night in the era before cell phones, I was 18, walking a very long way home from work, and I foolishly accepted a ride home from a strange man. I was a small town girl, living in her lonely world, and I had just gotten off of a double shift. He was elderly, acted genuinely concerned for me, and I saw a Bible in the back seat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken down, and he had to get out to open the door for me. It took him a while as he had trouble walking with a bum leg. He told me the passenger door didn't open from the inside. I immediately felt weird, but years of nice girl training told me that he's gone to so much trouble, don't say no. We chatted for a while and he politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and told me that I looked like his late wife, and that her spirit must have led him to help get me home. It sounded very sweet the way he told it. The conversation turned to if I was still in school, what my hobbies were like, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period, which was rude, but he acted like it was going to be the punchline of a joke, so I laughingly asked him why he would want to know. He said, very calmly,
"Because, if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away."
Oh shit. He said that God had kept him lonely for years, but now, because I looked so much like his late wife, it was clear that I was meant to be his, so he could start a life over again, and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to do. He grabbed my hand and kissed it, and said,
"I can't wait to show you our new bed."
I told him I forgot something at work. He told me I could get it tomorrow. I told him I needed to pee, and he said that I could hold it until we got home. He wasn't going to let me out. He kept talking about how things were different back then, and how men are the head of the households, that women are to follow their fathers and their new husbands, and God says this, and God says that. He talked about his wedding day, how his wife's father had given her to him, so I blurted out, "You're going to get my father's permission to marry me before taking me to your home, right? God would want that, right? You need to do that because otherwise we'd be living in sin, and the marriage bed isn't holy anymore," which I remembered from many, many days of church sermons. He got offended then and said that he knew the Bible better than I did, and of course he knew to ask my father for permission. I told him that we couldn't live together in sin, and we should go to my house before going home, and I reminded him that the street wasn't far. Still trying to keep the conversation light and joking, I told him that's what a godly man would do, and he wholeheartedly agreed. Then we got to the street where I had previously told him I lived. He asked which house was my parents'. I gave him a fake house number far away from mine and had him drop me there. He wanted to come inside. I told him I needed to let my parents know about God sending me a husband before he could meet them. I said it would take a few days, come back tomorrow. He said,
"I'll give you a few minutes, but then we need to be on our way."
I told him to drive around the block so I could have some time to pack my clothes. He nodded and finally opened the car door. I ran to that house's door, waved to him till he drove away, then sprinted to my house, where I lived alone. I double-bolted the door and put the couch in front of it that night. I never saw him again. I didn't call the police, though I wish I had. I moved in with my boyfriend a few days later, and I insisted on waiting at work until he could pick me up every night.
Number 4.
This just happened to me a few nights ago, and I'm still a bit shaken up, so bear with me. I'm a female bartender at a small cafe that doubles as a venue. During the day, we serve coffee and lunch, and at night, we have a full bar with bands, comedy shows, etc. On this night, there was an open mic comedy show. Not a lot of comedians showed up, so we ended up closing up shop early and I was ready to go home. I had a patron come in and order a single beer during the comedy show. He was acting nervous, but being a female bartender, I get male customers that are shy or don't want to talk to women, so I didn't think much about it. He sat down, sipped his beer, and watched the show. Since we closed early, everyone was pretty much gone, and I wanted to lock up and clean so I could get home. After I escorted the last couple out of the bar and got ready to lock the door, I see the man from earlier walk down the back hallway and into the men's restroom. Not even a minute later, he burst through the door yelling,
Hurry, come back here, I need help.
I stood at the opposite end of the hallway and asked him what was wrong.
The toilet's overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Please, help me clean this up.
I could tell that something was wrong with that answer, and I replied, It's okay, man, it happens. I'll mop it up. I'm just trying to close up right now. He continued to argue with me, trying to get me to come into the bathroom with him as I stood about 20 feet away down the hallway. Finally, he walks towards me very aggressively and tries to grab my arm.
You need to come back here now,
he says. I immediately put my hands out in front of me so he cannot come any closer, and I tell him that he has to leave. He walks outside and I lock the door behind him. I check the bathroom and it's completely spotless. No water on the floor at all. I flush the toilet and the urinal, and they're both working fine. I start to get nervous and I take my large pocket knife and clip it to the waistband of my pants, just in case. As I'm cleaning our espresso machine and putting toppers on the liquor bottles, I hear a tapping noise. I look up at the front of the store, which is one big window that has a few curtains covering it. The same man is tapping on the window, waving at me and laughing like a maniac. I watch him walk over to the door and pull on it. It doesn't open since I had locked it after he left. He starts screaming and pounding on the glass saying, Open the fucking door, I'm going to fucking kill you. Fight overcame flight at this point and I walked around the counter and about 6 feet from the door. I pulled out my knife and locked eyes with him and yelled, I'm calling the cops, get the fuck out of here. He smiled and walked out of view of the window. At this point, all of my adrenaline just crashed. I locked myself in the office and called 911, crying, explaining that I'm alone and a man tried to lure me into the bathroom and was outside trying to get into my bar. I waited an hour and a half and no police ever showed up. I called my boyfriend and he drove up to the shop. My manager watched the security cameras from home, making sure that the man didn't come back. I did the deposit and immediately drove home, my boyfriend following closely behind me. My male busboy has been coming into work with me, so I'm not alone, and the managers have been keeping an eye on the security cameras while I'm working.
Number 3.
My encounter took place earlier this week in a beach town in Central Florida. I surf. It's a big part of my life, and if I go a few days without getting in the water, I go through withdrawals. In the last year, my work schedule has changed so that I'm working a lot of late evenings, usually getting home around 4 a.m. I live on the beach and have gotten myself into a routine of coming home, grabbing a bowl of cereal, then getting my board and heading to the beach around 4:30 a.m. It's still dark at this time, but most nights the moonlight and the glow from the pier is enough to illuminate the waves. I'll usually surf for a couple of hours, catch the sunrise, and then head home to sleep. Most days the beach is empty for the first hour or so, with the exception of the occasional jogger. Monday starts off with the usual routine. I usually stay pretty close to the pier, but the rip current was strong, and on days like that, I just drift with the current until I hit a point about a half mile down from the pier, then paddle back into shore and back to the starting point. As I was waiting for the next set, I noticed the outline of someone standing on the shore, watching me. I couldn't really make out any details, just that there was indeed a person there. I really didn't think twice about it, as it's not uncommon for people to stop and watch for a few minutes. I continued surfing and put him out of mind. Approximately 45 minutes later, the current has pulled me to my marker and I start to paddle into shore. It's then that I notice what I think is the same person from earlier, still lingering, which is odd because I've been out there for a while and drifted a fair distance. He apparently followed along the whole time, on the shore. I reach the shore, throw a quick glance in his direction. He's a husky white male, about 40-ish, wearing some shorts and a ratty-looking red 49ers shirt from what I can see. He's about 15 feet behind, in the shadows, and I started walking briskly back up the beach towards the pier and my beach access ramp. He follows along, always keeping the same distance, even though I speed up and slow down a few times just to see how he reacts. Nothing is said, but it's clear he's following me at this point. I get to the beach access ramp, turn around, and he's gone. He must have ducked behind one of the hotel stairwells is all I can think, but I wasn't going to go look for him and just chalked it up to one of the local homeless or eccentrics the area attracts and didn't really give it any more thought. End of story, right? Well, not exactly. Fast forward to the next morning. It's overcast and a little darker out. I'm in my routine and am back on the beach at about 4:45 a.m. The swells are light and I'm close to the pier just floating as there is no rip current this day. I start to get that you are being watched feeling and can't seem to shake it. Looking around, the beach and pier are deserted, except I notice what looks like a lone fisherman standing above me on the pier, but can't really make out any of his details as he is backlit and I can only see his outline. I don't notice a pole and he seems to be just standing there. I get into a wave and as I glance back, it looks like the guy threw something into the water at that moment. I didn't think anything of it until a few minutes later when I glance back and it appears he just tossed something else into the water. As soon as I look in his direction, he stops what he's doing and just stands there, motionless. So now I'm curious what he's up to. The sky is lighting up a bit and the next set of waves rolls through. This time, as I start to paddle into the wave, I'm watching him over my shoulder. As soon as it looks like my attention is elsewhere, the man tosses in several more objects, yet stops as soon as I'm turned back towards him. It finally dawns on me what he's doing. He's chumming the water by tossing chunks of meat into the sea around me. You chum to attract fish, and the bigger pieces you use, the bigger fish you attract. And these were not small. This guy has no fishing gear with him and is attempting to attract sharks right to where I am, in the dark water, maybe 150 yards offshore. I am instantly a mix of fear and anger. I start paddling hard but steadily into shore, and he then drops all pretense and dumps an entire bucket over the side of the pier, while starting to walk back towards the shore end. As I get out of the water, I start to move towards the pier stairwell, intent on confronting him. I'm no punk, and this guy just put me into a dangerous situation. He is coming down the pier in my direction as well, and this is when I finally get a decent look at the guy. He appears a little heavyset, and he's wearing a red shirt, a red 49ers shirt, the same guy from the day before. At this moment, a strong feeling comes over me that I need to get out of there instead of escalating the situation further. I'm not the toughest guy on the block, but I've had my share of scraps and generally don't shy away from confrontation. But something inside of me felt really wrong. I change directions and begin walking towards the beach access ramp and home. He comes down the stairs and continues to follow me at about a 10-foot distance. The only sounds are the waves crashing on the shore as we play out our low-speed pursuit across the sand. I get to the beach ramp and start to go up. Now, this ramp has a 90-degree turn about halfway that leads to a 30 or so yard long walkway between two condo buildings to access the beach street. Once I hit the 90-degree turn and am out of his immediate line of sight, I book it and double time to the far end of the walkway, putting some distance between us. I'm still going back and forth in my head if I should confront him or follow my gut and walk away. I stop and wait at the far end of the walkway as he turns the corner at the 90-degree bend and just stops. We just stare at each other in silence. After what felt like ages but was probably all of 20 seconds, he reaches into his waistband and draws out what I take to be a fillet knife. I can see its reflection in the light. He waves to me with his other hand, lets out a short, sharp laugh, and quickly spins on his heels, disappearing back down the ramp and out of sight. I decided that I had had enough, and taking a slightly roundabout route to make sure he wasn't tailing me still, I headed home. I haven't seen him since, but I also haven't been back to the beach in a few days.
Number 2.
I'm now 53 years old, but back in 97, I was just getting over a nasty divorce and decided to move back to North Carolina from California. I spoke with my sister who still lived in our hometown, and she suggested that I talk with her husband Steve about his rental house. I remember that at the time he was very enthusiastic about my renting his house and gave me an absurdly low monthly rate for the place. He explained that the house was originally built in 1910, which immediately gave me pause as the place was likely an old dump. He must have sensed my hesitation because he quickly began listing all the renovations that he made to the place in the past few years, and assured me that anything that I found not to my liking he could quickly fix. He explained that he was having a bit of trouble keeping it rented because, while the house itself was nice, the neighborhood was a bit seedy, and former tenants had complained about people somehow entering the house while they were gone to work. He told me that he had now installed all new locks as well as an alarm system, so intrusions were a thing of the past. Also, there was a small unattached guest house on the property, freshly renovated, that was now occupied by a friend of his named Jake, who would keep an eye on my place as well. Additionally, he would waive the first month's rent since I was family. It sounded like a pretty good deal, and I thanked him and accepted. With cash being tight and still needing to land a job once I arrived, I was grateful for his help. 2 weeks later, I packed up my van and hit the road cross country. A few uneventful days later, I pulled up to my sister's house and had a nice homecoming. It was December, and being spoiled by West Coast weather, I had forgotten about the winter time, so my first priority was getting a good winter coat, as well as some basic household items that I could not bring in the van. Fortunately, my sister donated a bed as well as a dining table, so a round of shopping got the rest of the things I needed. After shopping with my sister, it was late in the afternoon when we set out in my van to offload it into my new home. The street the house was on was an oddity to me. When we first turned onto the street close to my sister's address, the area was bright and clean, but the closer we got to my new home, the more gloomy it became. Even before pulling up to the house, you could tell from a distance that it was quite a large 2-story affair. My sister commented that it had 4 bedrooms, 2 on each floor, with one of the downstairs rooms having a window overlooking the front porch, and a matching bedroom on the second floor, also overlooking the street. The house itself was shaped like a rectangle, with the southern short end facing the street. It was a bit of a climb to the front door of the house as it was connected to the sidewalk by 2 steep flights of wide stone steps, similar to a vintage New York City brownstone home. We climbed the steps and my sister pointed out the new bright yellow exterior paint job. I nodded, but my attention was on the dim outline of the front door, which was bathed in the shadow of the porch's full-length overhang. In the center of the door were 6 large panes of clear glass. I glanced at my sister. Won't it be pretty easy for someone to break in through all this glass? She smiled. No one has ever broken in this door. It's tougher than it looks. She handed me the keys and I unlocked the door. The light switches are just inside the door. She flipped on the interior light and from the front door, I could now see a long hallway with a door to my immediate left that opened into the downstairs front bedroom, and at the end of the hallway, a door to the left and to the right, the entrance to the staircase heading upstairs. She marched over to the alarm box and typed in a code. There's motion detectors downstairs, here in the hall, in each room and at the top of the staircase. You can activate them at night if you want, as long as you're staying upstairs. Otherwise you only have 30 seconds to disarm them before the call goes out to the security monitoring service. On your keyring, you have the keys to the rental door locks on the 2 downstairs bedrooms. They've been cleaned, and just keep them locked. We'd like to rent them out at some point. I grimaced. What's with the blue door? Every inch of the hallway's hardwood floor had been neatly painted blue. Oh, Steve felt that refinishing them was going to be a big bother, so he just had each floor painted teal and then just sealed them. Great. I ran my hand over the vintage doorframe to the bedroom and thought it a shame that its scrollwork and medallions were all glopped over liberally with fresh white paint. We moved down the hallway and went through the doorway. This is the formal dining room. I'll get that table of mine and set it up in here for you. The room itself looked big enough to feed an army. She led me through a doorway centered in the right wall of the dining room. And here's the kitchen. The kitchen was also huge, obviously meant to accommodate a very large family back in the day. Looks like I can cook the next Thanksgiving meal. She nodded and pointed at the open door opposite the kitchen entrance. That door leads to the downstairs suite, which has the second bedroom, the laundry room, and the downstairs bathroom. Walking over to the open door, she pointed at the brick propping the door open. Please leave this brick alone, as this door needs to be kept open so that the warm air in the house can keep the pipes in the bathroom from freezing up. No problem, and I'll see if I can find you a cheap deal on a washer and dryer. Thanks, sis. I'd appreciate that. We then headed upstairs, where there were 2 more bedrooms, with the larger of the 2 having an attached bathroom. I thought this room would be the one for you. It did look like a nice setup for me. Yeah, I think this'll do just fine. I could tell she was pleased. Okay, let's head back to my house and we can finish getting you moved in tomorrow. We can transfer the utilities over in the morning. Settling in for the ride back to my sister's house, I already knew that something was wrong with my new home. Over the years, I've read a few accounts of haunted houses, and most had a familiar theme. A happy family moves into a home and slowly becomes aware that the house has spirits and a dark side to it. They typically did not believe in ghosts when they moved in, and only came to believe as strange incidences began to pile up. My story here is just the opposite. From the moment we pulled up to the house, I could feel something watching the car from the upstairs window. I could also feel whatever it was moving around the house with us, but careful not to show itself. In retrospect, I recall always being able to generally sense where in the house it was, but especially if it was in the same room or looking at me. I don't claim any gift, and have not had any such experiences since that time. The atmosphere of the house inside was, I can only describe as both intensely silent and heavy. This was not a happy home. In truth, my state of mind at the time, overwhelmed with the separation from my kids and the divorce, was so bleak that the house's mood suited me just fine. I wasn't looking for happiness, and this house offered none. My only concern, as I recall, was hoping that the spirit lurking there would not get too irritating. But I can tell you for certain that at the time, I was absolutely unafraid. A ghost in the house was just one of many things to be cautious with in that neighborhood. Carjackings, armed robbery, and burglary, those all concerned me more than some spook. My late uncle had explained long ago that spirits could play some little games with you if you let them know that you felt afraid. I have had 2 prior encounters with spirits before moving into this house, but those will be saved for another time. In general, I characterize myself as a practical man with little interest in the supernatural, despite the fact that I know it exists. Once I got my few bits of borrowed furniture and my stuff sorted out in the house, my life fell into a normal routine. I found a job at a local printing company about a mile from the house and was glad to cram in as much overtime as I could. After a while, I had gotten caught up on my bills and my pace at the work slowed down. I then began to spend more time at home. The spirit had kept its distance during that time, and I had hoped it would stay that way, but the quiet would not last. One night, I was dozing in my bed upstairs when I heard walking sounds downstairs. Someone with a heavy tread was moving down the entry hall. I listened. I then heard the sounds of someone slowly coming up the staircase. I grabbed my baseball bat and ran to the top of the stairs, flicking the lights on. The stairs were empty, but I could sense this thing about halfway down the staircase. I stared at its location. I was scared furious. Look, I don't care who you are. Just stop this stomping around and quit trying to screw with me. We both live here, and I could care less about your sad story, so just leave me alone. With that, I went back to my bedroom and slammed the door. It was quiet the rest of the night, and I remember when the sun came up, having a smug sense of victory. I would only later realize how wrong I was. Now that the cat was out of the bag and it knew that I could sense its location, it began playing some games to get to me indirectly. I'll share those that I recall. It became almost a daily occurrence to come home only to find the brick that held open the door to the downstairs suite moved to the center of the kitchen and the door to the suite closed. It caused me to constantly worry about the pipes during the winter time, and anything else I propped the door open with simply joined the brick in the middle of the kitchen. This never occurred when I was home for the day, only when I was away at work. About twice a week, I would get a call from my brother-in-law informing me that the downstairs motion detector had gone off again, and the security company had called him to get an all clear. He asked me if anyone else had a key or was visiting, and the answer was always no. Eventually the problem got so bad that he first had the system inspected by the alarm company, who found nothing wrong, and finally he had the system turned off just to stop the phone calls. Normally I sleep pretty lightly. One Saturday morning, the sound of my bedroom door opening caused me to lift my head up and open my eyes. It had just gotten light outside, but I was startled to see the old lady from the house next door standing there watching me. Now, this lady had a drinking problem and seemed to be a permanent fixture on her front porch where, brown bag bottled in hand, she glumly stared at the street traffic, never speaking. But today, she did. "What the hell are you doing here?" I said as I shot up from bed. "Well, I knocked on the door to ask if I could borrow $5, and the man said to go upstairs and ask you." "Fuck, what man?" "I don't know, I ain't seen him before. Can I borrow $5? "No, get out of my house." It took me a few minutes of pushing and shouting before I finally herded her out to the porch, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. The next day, having calmed down a bit, I walked over to her and offered her the $5 in return for first hearing all about this mysterious man. "Well, I ain't seen him before, like I told you." "Right, what did he look like?" "He looked about 70 to my eyes. He wore blue pants, a long-sleeved blue t-shirt, and his collar was buttoned up. He had white hair but was mostly bald. Like I said, I asked him if I could borrow $5 and he just smiled and said his tenant was upstairs and said that I should go ask him. He let me in and then shut the door. That's the last I seen him. Can I have my money now?" "Sure, take it. If you see him again, let me know." I wandered back up my steps, now confident that I'd been given a warning. Once I had some money built up, I decided to join 1997 and buy myself a new big screen TV and one of those fancy new DVD players. It took 2 delivery guys from the appliance store to lug my new 50-inch projection TV up to the 2nd floor. You remember those 200-pound monsters, right? They set it up in the empty 2nd bedroom upstairs, and with the addition of a used recliner, I now had an official entertainment room. About a week after the TV was installed, I got a call from Jake next door while working the evening shift. "Dude, you better come home now. Your TV is blasting the house. I came outside wondering where all the racket was coming from, and looked up and saw your TV on through the upstairs window. I was gonna knock and ask you to turn it down when I noticed your car was gone." "Holy shit, someone's broken in?" "Dude, I'm trying to tell you, the TV's still on. They're still in the house." "Just stay outside and keep an eye on the front. I'll be right there." It took me only 3 minutes to race home, and when I pulled up, Jake was watching the front door and waved me up next to him. "This is freaking weird, man. As soon as I heard you turn the corner, I saw the TV light cut off. Just go around and guard the back door. I'm going through the front. I'll let you in and we can check the house together." I opened the front door. The house was dead quiet. I toggled the hall light switch, but got nothing. Looks like the breaker was tripped, and that meant traveling the length of the 1st floor back to the laundry room to the fuse box. Fishing my cigarette lighter from my pocket, I lit it and headed in. The feeble glow seemed to just make me jumpier. I had to walk slowly as running would snuff out the flame. Great. I just knew that some nut was waiting to pounce on me from the darkness, and was now mentally kicking myself for not just calling the cops. But in those days, and in that neighborhood, the cops would take like an hour to show up. Still, I could just see the headline now. "Moron armed with a Bic ladder confronts serial killer. Community alarmed by horrific murder." Thankfully, I reached the fuse box safely and was able to reset the breaker. Turning the lights on, I then let Jake in from the front door. "Did you see him?" "No, the breaker was tripped. He's likely still upstairs. Let's go." But there was nothing. Jake and I searched every inch of that house, with Jake getting more and more unsettled. I remember how he stared at me. "Dude, someone was here, I swear it." "Well, they're gone now. They must have slipped out the window or something." Jake didn't look convinced, and neither was I. You see, when my brother-in-law installed the alarm system, he also had security bolts installed in all of the house's inside window frames. You couldn't open any window without first removing its hex nut screw. I didn't think it likely that a druggy intruder would bring a toolbox with him. I had gotten home one evening, having had a very busy work week, and was glad that I had gotten paid earlier that day. I had hit the ATM on the way home and had $80 in cash so that I could visit the utility company in the morning and pay my bill. The next morning found me in line at the electric company, handing the clerk my bill. But when I opened my wallet to get my cash, there was nothing there. My money was gone. I was absolutely bewildered as I stepped out of line and drove back to the ATM. I even went inside the bank and was reassured that I actually had withdrawn $80 the previous day. I could only conclude that somehow the four $20 bills had dropped out of my wallet. I looked all about the house but never found them. 3 weeks passed and one day I was getting ready for a date and was getting some socks on from my sock drawer. I spotted a $20 bill lying perfectly straight on the bottom of the drawer. Next to it, I saw the edge of another bill. I began lifting rolled up socks out of the drawer, and finally I saw the bottom of the drawer completely. All four $20 bills were neatly lined up across the bottom of the drawer. I had just done my laundry the day before, and can assure you that there was no money in that sock drawer at that time. Although I was fuming over this prank, it was at least good to know that I had not somehow lost the money myself. From that moment on, I always slept with my car keys and wallet inside my pillowcase. Each one of the house's 4 bedrooms had its own fireplace that my brother-in-law had renovated over to gas logs. Since the house had no central heating, I had the habit of using the various fireplaces as space heaters as needed during the winter months. Individually, each one was more than capable of warming the house up like toast if left running full blast for a short time. I recall that one bitterly cold January evening, I was running the one in my bedroom at about medium strength, which had the bedroom toasty warm when I went to sleep that night. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like I was about to freeze to death. I flicked on the bedside table lamp and looked at the fireplace, still cheerfully running at medium strength. Hissing at the cold, I could actually see my breath fogging as it hit the air. I lurched over to the fireplace and checked for a draft or anything that could explain the fireplace's heat being sucked out of the room. No drafts, nothing. I could feel the heat only when my fingers were a few inches from the flames, but that was it. As I stood there staring at it, suddenly an enormous wave of heat erupted from the flames, as though the heat had somehow been held from the room and was abruptly released. Within a few minutes, the room was warm again and back to normal. Troubled, I went back to bed and had no further problems that night. Some 3 years into my stay at that house, I met the woman that I would ultimately marry. My girlfriend visited the house a number of times, but infinitely preferred my coming over to her place, as she said my house made her feel a bit uneasy. I stayed silent on the subject and happily went to her house instead. Then came the time when we decided to move in together. We decided that a new apartment was in order, one that was centrally located for both of our jobs. The only catch was that the lease for her current apartment was coming up for renewal, and I couldn't get out of my lease until the end of the following month. The bottom line was that her household would have to go into storage for a few weeks and she would have to move in with me during that time. We could then move into the new apartment together. She was certainly not happy with spending any time at my house. She didn't see anything, but confided that she always had the feeling, when alone, that the house was staring at her. She typically arrived at home about an hour before me in the afternoon, so one day, about a week before we were due to move, I was surprised to come home, only to find her sitting in her car out at the curb. I knocked on her window and she hurriedly wiped her eyes and stepped out to hug me. I took her in my arms and swiveled my head about, looking for any dodgy types that may have caused her tears. After practically begging her to tell me what was wrong, she would only reply that she arrived at the house about 40 minutes prior to my arrival and had gone inside. She then decided to come back outside and wait in her car for me. My common sense had told me that something had happened inside the house, so I gently asked if something had occurred that made her feel in danger. She shook her head no, but quietly informed me that until we departed the house, she would never be alone in it again. She would sit at her office until I called her that I was near the house. To this day, she still refuses to tell me what happened to her in the house that afternoon, so I guess that will stay a mystery. Moving day came all too soon, and by the end of the day, we were both exhausted. There was only one task left to do, and that was give my old house a good cleaning before dropping off the keys to my brother-in-law. My girlfriend suggested that I wait till the morning, but I said no. I was determined to tie up all loose ends that evening and be done with this house. I drove over and spent the next few hours cleaning up and mopping the floors. At the end of it, I was pleased with my work and figured that the house was certainly much cleaner than when I moved in. I had placed my box of cleaning supplies in the trunk of my car and walked back up the steps one last time to lock up. I'm not sure why, but something compelled me to step inside and say something. Hey, as you can see, I'm moved out now. I can't say it's been fun, but it's been a home, I guess. Well, goodbye. With that, I locked up and walked down to my car. Giving the house a final glance, I saw the outline of someone peering out of the second floor window down upon me. My first and last glimpse of my landlord. I drove away and have carefully avoided that neighborhood ever since.
Number 1.
As we reached the entrance of the building, we noticed that the big black hole we had been seeing was in fact what looked like a generator room. It seemed that the generator room used to have a wooden gate to gain access, but this had been destroyed by vandals, revealing the darkness within. As we got closer, we realized that there were two ways to get in. Either A, through the front double doors into what looked like a main foyer, or B, through a crooked-looking wooden door at the other end of the generator room. We chose the main foyer as it was the most welcoming option, and going through the generator room would have involved some athleticism to avoid hitting body parts on the machinery. It was a big generator for the size of the building, but I guess it would have powered other parts of the area as well. I pictured in my mind how, when the place was active and inhabited, that generator would have been running and noisy with purpose, but now it was just unused and in darkness, still as ice. When entering the main foyer of our last building, we were instantly in awe by how spacious the room was, but also how creepy it looked. From our low-light point of view entering the room, there was a corridor to the left at the back of the room protected by two doors with circular, submarine-like windows, a corridor at the back to the right which didn't have doors, a staircase to the immediate left which had windows for banisters so you could cock your head and look up into the darkness upstairs. And on the immediate right of the room was a smaller room with what looked like rows upon rows of hooks. I assumed that this would have been where security would be, and the many keys needed to access all the different parts of the site. I was the first one to assert our presence on the place by walking to the other end of the room to peer into the windows of the corridor going off to the left. My attention was drawn to just how much more the place had degraded compared to the other buildings. What was left of the paint on the walls was peeling, the carpet was mouldy to the extent that it had liquefied to gloop and squelched under my feet. There was also an extra special pungent smell of death in the air, which made me wonder how many pigeons called this home and died here. Peering through the circular windows, the corridor led into another big room, which had much of the same, apart from a metal blind that ran along most of the room from the right doorframe at the entry to another door with a glass panel. This room had all the trademarks of a school canteen. I turned around to look where the others were, when I froze to look down the corridor opposite, the one at the back on the right. It looked like an endless black hole, even when A shone his torch down the corridor. I had a really bad feeling that I shouldn't go down this corridor, but it's not like I wanted to either. It terrified me. I averted my gaze and turned my attention to the others who, it would appear, were following my lead, as they also seemed a bit overwhelmed by the density of the darkness in our new environment. As I had already part-surveyed the canteen room and seen no immediate dangers, I opened the double doors and pushed on ahead with the others not far behind me in a triangular defensive formation. All angles were covered in case anything crept up on us. My initial observations regarding the canteen proved correct as we entered the room. A sign above the entry to behind the metal blinds read "Kitchen staff only." Other than that, there was nothing else of interest in the room to mention, other than how big the window seemed from the inside, which showed the contrast between the darkness inside the building compared to outside, almost making it seem like outside was lit up. Almost, but not quite there. It was still a struggle to see anything without our torches. As I was observing the outside through the windows to see if anybody had been creeping up on us, I heard A let out a shocked gasp which caught the attention of B and I. When we went over to see what his torch had illuminated, we were both equally made uneasy. 3 straight lines, resembling the mocking of the Trinity, had been slashed through the metal blinds. In case you don't know what the mocking of the Trinity is, I suggest you watch some paranormal investigation programs. It's supposedly the mark of demons of Satan used to mock the Holy Trinity, most commonly found on a person when they've been antagonizing in a location haunted by a demon. B ran his fingers down the mark, but not before pulling his hand away and turning white. B explained that the metal around these marks was still quite hot. With nothing around to logically explain why the metal would still be hot, the feeling of dread in all 3 of us set in. The darkness intensified worse than I'd seen it all evening, and we were all instantly in a state of high alert, causing us to look slowly around us, taking in every detail and looking for the smallest of movements. We have been doing our exploration for a couple of hours now, so for the blinds to still be hot as they were would mean that the metal blinds were slashed while we were there. Whatever or whoever had slashed the blinds would most likely still be around. We never even knew anybody else would be here, but would they know that we were here? Could they be in the same building, or indeed watching us right now? I think the same thoughts were rushing through all of our minds at the same time. We were all just stood there, silent. I felt the need to make sure that nothing behind the metal blind was causing it to heat up. I hoped that there would be something to explain it. I slowly and cautiously stepped forward to the kitchen door and shone my light inside the direction of the slashes. I could see a lot of cooking apparatus was still in the room, but nothing was contacting the metal blind. I tried to confirm my suspicions by entering the room, but to my surprise, the door was locked. Nothing I saw provided a logical explanation to why the blind was so hot, so my feeling of dread didn't alleviate. I turned around in defeat to see both A and B glaring at me. I didn't warn them I was going to the door, so I guess they were wondering what I was doing. I motioned to them that we should make a move and head back in the direction of the foyer. No words were necessary. This was the longest that we had been silent in each other's company for a long while. Back in the main foyer, we stood there still in complete silence, just looking at each other, soaking up everything that we had just witnessed, when we all turned in sync towards the dark corridor opposite the canteen. I concluded to myself that I was not going down that corridor after what I had just saw, and judging by A and B's expressions, they weren't too keen either. Our silence was broken by A, who requested that I take a photo of him as a souvenir of his investigation tonight. I had to confirm to him if he wanted the photograph taken inside this building, as I did not particularly feel safe, but A explained that it would take less than a minute, so I ended up obliging. A took up a pose and position in front of the double doors we had just exited from the canteen, and I began making sure my camera was set up properly to take a picture in our current setting. B moved positions to nearby the stairs in readiness for our probable exploration of the upper level. With a click of the button and a flash, the picture was taken. Upon review, it appeared I had moved the camera too quickly, as the picture was all blurred, so I motioned A to repose so I could take another shot. I focused my breath and steadied my nerves for the short time I took the second shot. I gave a thumbs up to A and was about to review the photo when suddenly the dreadful tranquility of the moment was pierced by a loud boom, which came from an unknown location. It felt like this noise rippled the blood in my body. We were all looking around frantically when there was another loud thud, followed by another one, which I then realized was coming from upstairs and sounded like very heavy footsteps right above. The loud thuds slowly continued as I turned my attention to B, who was stood near the stairs. I saw his pupils dilate in complete shock as he then turned to look up in the direction of upstairs, while at the same time a final loud thud from the top of upstairs sent us all over the edge. Without a second thought, flight mode kicked in. I don't think I'd ever run so fast in my life. Physically, everything was happening so quickly, but mentally, time was at a standstill as I went over my predicament like my life was flashing before my eyes. I thought about the compound as it loomed over us as we drew ever closer to it. I thought about how I left in that moment, about how I should have listened to those feelings. I thought about the darkness, the L-shaped building, the creepy ladder, the pigeon scaring me, and A disappearing. I remembered the strange man at the gate, the police line, the blood. I relived my experience of being all alone, seeing things and hearing voices. After what felt like I had just lived through decades in my head, I snapped out of the trance and regained some composure as I found our exit point and bundled out the compound, followed by B and finally by A. We all stopped to look back at the compound, but there was no movement or no one to be found. Everything was still, everything was silent, even the sea. I still felt like we were being watched as we continued to eyeball the place that had instilled so much fear in us, so much paranoia, and in the end, so much dread. This is one place I will not be coming back to in a long time. My thoughts were suddenly popped by the sound of A drop down and crouching with his hands tucked into his legs. A looked the most worst for wear out of all of us. The fear had taken over him completely. I watched as A, this 6'6" machine of a man, break down right in front of me, wallowing in his newfound dread. I had never seen a man of his size cry like that before. A was inconsolable and kept shouting about all the negative, scary thoughts now occupying his head, and kept asking B and I to make them stop. I wasn't sure whether A was in shock or was in complete adrenaline mode, but I joined B in reassuring him everything was okay as we were now out of the compound. After about 15 minutes, we managed to calm A down to the point that he felt like he could walk again, and we began the journey back to our houses with the sun now starting to rise. The walk home was not as eventful as our night in the compound. I kept quiet as I was still rerunning things over in my head and wondering about all the loose ends from the night. I also thought about all the unanswered questions I had, such as what those thuds were or where that sinister laughter came from, which I now concluded was not my imagination. The sun continued to rise as we progressed on our journeys home. I was now worried about A. I had never seen him this bad before. I never thought in that moment how much our exploration had broken him, but I'd soon find out as things would take a much more sinister turn away from the compound. In fact, I continue to this day to worry about A. I wish I could say that the story ends now that we've completed our urban exploration, but sadly, it doesn't.